The studio lights burned brightly, casting a golden glow over the stage. The audience was buzzing with excitement, but as soon as the screen flickered to life, silence fell over the room like a heavy blanket. A video played on the giant screen. A 7-year-old boy sat in a wheelchair, his small hands gripping the armrests as if they were the only things keeping him grounded. His face was full of innocence, yet his eyes held a sadness far too deep for someone his age. His voice trembled, hesitant yet desperate, as he looked straight into the camera. "My mom hugs me every day, but I can't hug her back." The room froze. You could hear a pin drop. Some audience members instinctively reached for tissues while others clasped their hands together, their expressions shifting from curiosity to heartbreak. Sylvester Stallone sat motionless, his gaze locked onto the boy. The weight of those words wrapped around his chest like an iron chain. He had seen pain before, had witnessed struggles, battles, and losses, but something about this child's quiet resilience struck him deeper than anything else. Everyone has a defining moment in life. Maybe this was his. The host finally broke the silence, turning to Sylvester. "Mr. Stallone, this child's biggest dream is to one day walk and embrace his mother, but life has taken even that away from him. What do you have to say?" Sylvester inhaled slowly, his fingers curling into the arms of his chair. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly powerless, until a thought surged through him like an electric current. He leaned into the microphone, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. Sometimes, even the simplest things in life are out of reach for some, but does this child's dream have to remain impossible? If everyone in this room comes together, maybe, just maybe, we can make a miracle happen. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. The energy shifted. People weren't just watching a story anymore, they were feeling it. The camera slowly zoomed in on Sylvester's face. At that moment, only one thought consumed him: I have to help this child. When Sylvester arrived at the boy's home, he was greeted at the door by a woman who looked exhausted but radiated unconditional love. She was the boy's mother. Her face was pale, her eyes red from sleepless nights, yet the moment she looked at her son, the pure affection in her gaze said everything words couldn't. "I always told him to be strong," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But the greatest pain a mother can endure is not being able to help her child." Sylvester lowered his head, his eyes landing on the child's small hands. The cold metal frame of the wheelchair seemed to represent the barriers standing between him and the world. The boy looked up at Sylvester with wide, hopeful eyes. "I've never walked before, but in my dreams I'm always running," he said softly. His words pierced through Sylvester like a dagger. At that moment, he made a promise to himself. This boy would one day walk to his mother and embrace her, no matter what it took. A few days later, a massive fundraising campaign was launched. News channels, social media, newspapers, everyone was talking about the boy's story. People turned their hopes into donations, believing in something bigger than themselves. But things were about to get much more difficult. When Sylvester visited the hospital to arrange the boy's treatment, he encountered an obstacle he hadn't anticipated. A cold, indifferent voice from the insurance company representative delivered the crushing news: "We're sorry, but this procedure is not covered under our policy. We cannot cover the cost of treatment." Sylvester clenched his fists. This was just a child. Was his future really going to be determined by paperwork and financial constraints? Was he truly expected to accept that this boy would remain in his wheelchair simply because he couldn't afford to walk? Taking a deep breath, Sylvester looked the official straight in the eye and said, "Then I'll change it with my own hands." Sylvester refused to give up. Despite the bureaucracy and the roadblocks thrown up by the insurance companies, he knew that this child's future would not be determined by numbers on a piece of paper, but by the power of humanity. As he left the hospital that day, only one thought occupied his mind. He had to make the whole world hear this child's story. The next morning, Sylvester grabbed his phone. With just a few calls, he reached some of the most influential figures in the business world. Meetings with major corporations were scheduled, media campaigns were launched, and the story began spreading like wildfire. But the biggest surprise came from Hollywood. A few well-known actors, upon hearing the boy's story, couldn't hold back their emotions. They stepped in front of the cameras, not just as celebrities, but as people who wanted to make a real difference. During a live broadcast, one famous actor, with tears in his eyes, spoke directly to the world. This child is teaching us all something. Giving up is not an option. If each of us makes even the smallest contribution, we can create a miracle." The campaign grew at an astonishing rate. Social media, television, newspapers, everyone was talking about it. People saw the innocence in the child's eyes and responded in the only way they knew how. They gave what they could. Thousands of small donations turned into a massive wave of hope. Finally, the total amount was announced. Sylvester could feel his heart pounding. Every effort, every sleepless night, every moment spent fighting for this cause, it had all led to this. A few days later, the hospital administration made an official announcement. All necessary medical expenses have been covered. The surgery will proceed as soon as possible. When Sylvester received the news, he immediately called the boy's mother. She could barely speak. The only sound on the other end of the line was her quiet sobbing. "Sylvester, my baby, you've given him a chance. I don't even know how to thank you." "Don't thank me," Sylvester said softly. "Thank your son, because he taught us all how to believe again." The day of the surgery arrived. The little boy lay in his hospital bed looking up at his mother. A smile played on his lips, but behind it was a hint of fear. Would it really work? What if the surgery didn't go as planned? What if his dream of hugging his mother remained just that? A dream? Sylvester sat down beside him, taking the boy's small hand in his own. He squeezed it gently, offering reassurance in the only way he knew how. "Today is your day, little buddy. After today, running won't just be in your dreams anymore." The boy's lips curled into a smile. This time there was no fear in his eyes, only hope. The operating room doors swung open. Doctors entered, preparing for what was to come. As they wheeled the boy inside, his mother reached out and grabbed Sylvester's hand, her fingers trembling. "What if it doesn't work? What if it doesn't turn out the way we hoped?" Sylvester met her gaze. The same question was on everyone's mind, but one thing was different now. Nobody in this room was alone anymore. "We're here to make it happen," Sylvester said with a confident smile. "And to make it happen, we just have to believe." As the hospital doors shut behind them, the world waited in anticipation, holding its breath for the moment that would change one child's fate forever. But the real question remained. Would a miracle truly happen? For weeks, Sylvester and the boy's mother stood by his side through every step. Every movement was painful, every attempt exhausting, but he never gave up. And then, the moment arrived. Sylvester was there during the boy's first physical therapy session. As the moment unfolded, the entire room held its breath. The boy, his legs trembling, took a step toward his mother, and finally, he embraced her. Tears streamed down her face, a reflection of a moment beyond words. Sylvester lowered his head, his eyes welling up, not with sadness, but with pure joy. A miracle had just happened. Days later, the footage of that moment aired on television. People across the country watched with tears in their eyes. Sylvester sat in front of the screen, watching in silence. At that moment, he understood something deep within his soul. You don't need superpowers to change the world. Sometimes all it takes is for one person to believe. And just before the screen faded to black, a final message was left for the audience. Whose life will you touch today?